Now we're ready to move on to Roman numeral 6 of our typed outline, and it's titled Colonization. So remember, you've already filled in 7 through 10 using the previous PowerPoint video recording, and now we're going to move into this short section of Roman numeral 6. So you can see here, this is the entire section 6 that you're going to use to complete this particular outline. So use that PowerPoint recording that we're about to go over. So here we go with colonization. So we know with the Spanish having this massive empire, all this land over in the New World, they are going to begin colonizing the actual land. So we can see here that the Spanish are going to force their culture on the Native Americans that were already living in the Americas. And when we say force their culture, we specifically mean their language is being forced on the Native Americans, their religion of Christianity, and the way that they dress. So basically, they are trying to assimilate the natives to be like the Spanish and the European, culture. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of resistance there because the natives have their own language and culture that they follow. So this is not going to go over well at all. But with the Spanish now having conquered a lot of that land, like where the Aztecs were and the Incas and the Mayans, what they're doing is they're putting in place a class system so that they make sure everyone understands who is in charge. And with this class system, there is basically a hierarchy. At the top of the class system and that hierarchy are the peninsulars. And if you can see on your typed outline, I gave you a little bit of space to include a just simple description of who they are. So on number 2, you've got a new class system developed with the peninsulars at the top. And a peninsular is basically a Spanish-born male who is very powerful. This is, of course, the ruler, the one in charge. And eventually we'll talk a little bit more about their position. They tended to marry the native women because a lot of Spanish women did not come over to the New World. There were some, but not enough for the Spanish male population. So a lot of the Spanish men would have relations with the native women, and if they produced a child together, that child would be considered a mestizo, because that is a mix between Spanish and Native American ancestry. You've got your father's ancestry and your mother's. And so together, that is what they call a mestizo. Now, these viceroys on the little b, anytime you have a peninsular, they end up becoming what's a viceroy, which is a Spanish governor here in the New World. And at the time period we're studying, there are 2 viceroys. One was in Mexico and one was in Peru. So make sure you write both of those down. There's no particular name that you have to know. Just know that at the time period we're studying, there were 2 viceroys in different locations. There was a Spanish viceroy in Mexico, and then there was a Spanish viceroy in Peru. So, people located there knew who was in charge. And that's because the Spanish king can't just leave Spain and come over and rule in 2 different locations. So this is going to solve that problem, okay? These peninsulars are basically in charge. They have to answer back to the King of England, King of Spain, of course. They can't just do whatever they want. They've got to, put in place any type of rules that the King of Spain would require. So they answer to him. Next, we need to take a look at the system that the Spanish put in place known as encomienda, which basically boils down to slavery. There's no easier way to say this. Unfortunately, the Native American Indians are going to be enslaved by the Spanish. And these natives, millions of them, will die from either being overworked, they died from disease exposure, because remember we said a lot of these natives don't have a strong immune system, or they died from just simply abuse, not following orders, things like that. Well, ultimately, this system was abolished in 1542. Remember we mentioned a letter that De las Casas had written to the Spanish king, and that at the time that didn't really go anywhere. Well, finally in 1542, the Spanish king decided to officially abolish this system of slavery against the Native Americans. So a little bit of good news there. Now, before it was abolished, you need to know that the Portuguese actually used this system first. They used it in Brazil. Remember, we talked about how Portugal laid claim to Brazil. And in Brazil, you had a large population of Native Americans located there. And the Portuguese start growing a lot of sugar there because it's a perfect environment to grow sugar. And then they can, of course, sell it back in Portugal. Well, all of these sugar plantations start popping up everywhere, and the natives were used as slaves to help grow the sugar. So this encomienda system was first used by the Portuguese in Brazil. You need to know that the Portuguese also used this system in the Caribbean, because the Caribbean is also a perfect location to grow a large amount of sugar. Now, eventually, later down the road, as the Native American population began to decrease, a lot of it was because they were dying from all these various possibilities, disease being a big one. The Spanish switched over to enslaving Africans. Okay, now again, this is before the whole system got abolished. So know that they switched at one point from using Native Americans to Africans. Now, why the switch? One of the reasons I just mentioned, so make sure you write it down, is because the natives were dying from disease. Okay, Africans have a lot of immunity to diseases, much more than the natives did, because they're around a lot more disease in Africa. So many of them had strong immune systems and weren't dying in large numbers like the natives. So that's one reason you can put down, that they would survive diseases. Another is that the Africans were much stronger. They obviously could do a lot more work than, let's say, the natives could. And they were used to extreme climate conditions. So I would put all three of those down. Again, they would survive disease, they were stronger, and they were used to extreme climate conditions. So we have now finished all of section 6 on your typed outline. So again, just make sure you're using the highlighted material to review a little bit each day, so that you are not waiting until the last minute to study for the upcoming quiz and then eventually the test.